Let's do some editing in Photo Raw. Today I'm going to show you how I take this single RAW file from this to this without even changing a single pixel. All right, so to kick this year off kind of the right way, I'm going to jump in and answer a few questions by doing some work. So you know, as everyone knows, this whole series, Approaching the Scene, is all about the photographic conversation. And I really do pay attention to the comments and the questions that I get, both in the YouTube channel comments and in my email, and however you reach out to me, whether it's through social media, YouTube, email. I'm always listening, so please join in that conversation. Thanks to everybody who's been submitting comments, liking the videos, subscribing, sharing it with others. A couple of the questions that I've had recently have revolved around editing. You know, what is this ON1 Photo Raw software that you like to finish edit in? What is it that you like about it? So I thought I'd do a full start to finish edit on one of my favorite images of the year from Patagonia, of this beautiful waterfall below Mount Fitzroy that was in a really high contrast situation. And we'll take a look at how the software handles working through that and what some of the cool things about it are. I still use Adobe software as well, but ON1 is a major client of mine, and the reason is that I love using their software. And I think a lot of times when people come on workshops with me that haven't used the software, they're always kind of astounded by just how powerful and intuitive it is. So we'll take a look at that. We're also going to take a look at why it's so important to back up your data through my own big mistake this holiday season. I sort of screwed up and accidentally wiped out some hard drives that were really important to me, and fortunately I had them backed up. You may hear my computer crunching a bit in the background. I'm moving a bunch of data from my local backups. And I'll talk about my backup plan and what happened to me and why you should be really careful of your data after we do this RAW file, edit this thing up. So we're here in Photo Raw. And you can go around browsing through your folders. You actually are looking at your own folders. You can catalog some folders. You can just go and navigate to localized folders. You don't have to import files and put them into the database to go to a folder and just start looking at images and editing them. But when you actually want to go through and do raw processing, you'll jump into edit. Right now we're in browse, and it's got metadata and file browsing and some organizational stuff like starring and liking and disliking and using color codes on your images and creating albums from images in multiple folders, all that kind of stuff that we're used to in other image editing and organizing software. But I want to take a look at this image. I'm going to jump in the thumbnail view from Mount Fitzroy, this waterfall that I encountered, gosh, 5 years ago, maybe 4.5 years ago. It was back when my wife was just pregnant with our first kiddo, Pike, who's about to turn 4. And it's a place I really wanted to get back to. My buddy John and I hiked up here. It's really not a very well-known waterfall. It's off the beaten path. It's something that he found years ago. And we got there a little late. There was direct sun on the falls, and it was tough to photograph, and it took me a lot of work to get an image that I liked from the shoot. So I wanted to get up there before dawn and get first light on the mountain and have the waterfall still without direct light, because the way the sun rises, the mountain's beautifully lit, but this tree casts a shadow. So we made it up there. A couple of workshop participants and I, a few workshop participants and I that had the energy after having backpacked for 2 days, or up to Lago Torre right before this. If you haven't heard about this whole adventure, you can check out a video from a couple weeks ago that's kind of a travel log of the Patagonia workshop, which was just epic. But basically the last full day of the workshop, my good friends Sam and Bill and CJ and I all got up here to this waterfall, and I found this composition that I'd found after the light had just gone to crap when I'd been up there before. And so, you know, you've got, as the sun first hits the mountain, it's still pretty darn bright. And just to be on the safe side, I bracketed it. I shot it exposed for the rocks and the waterfall, and then another shot more exposed for the mountain on the tripod, so I could do HDR if I wanted to. And if I wanted to do that in ON1, I could just click the two images, hit this HDR button right out of browse. You've got panos, merging two images in layers, focus stacking, and HDR right there. And you can see it's getting ready to do a blend in HDR. I'm a little worried about the wind blowing these tree limbs though, and how well those are going to line up. So I'm going to just see if I can work one image. Usually I think I've got all the tonality in this image right here. I don't think that these highlights are lost. And I'm going to jump into edit. So right now I'm in browse. I'm going to go into their editing portion, the raw processor, and I'm going to have a look and see if I'm right about that. So right now I'm going to kind of edit for the sky and the mountain, and I'm going to let these shadows fall away. I'm working on the more highly exposed image. I'm going to jump here where I can see the histogram, and I can see that there's some reds and blues blown out the way it's processed right now. And what I tend to do, I hold down the J key, which shows a clipping mask of blown highlights. You can see that's all red right now. And I'm going to pull those down, and I like to pull the whites about halfway, and if that doesn't do it for me, the way this raw processor works, everyone's a little different. I'll go ahead and pull the highlights down a little bit more. And it's still, you know, I've recovered the important red channel information that I need, but I still want it to be a little darker up there. So I'm actually going to grab exposure. Exposure has a lot of power in Photo Raw. I'm going to pull that exposure slider back, maybe even about a stop. And now the sky and the mountain are looking beautiful to me. So I can see that that data was there all along. I'm going to keep that J key held down, and I might move my whites out just a little bit, get some more contrast in those highlights without blowing any of those channels. Pull my highlights back. We're just creating a little contrast in the mountain and the sky. And again, we're just doing the basic develop raw processing. You can see there's these tabs up here. If I was working a portrait, there's a way to do skin smoothing and some cloning and healing and things that you use for portraits and all kinds of cool stuff in there. There's effects, which we're going to use to finish edit. There's local adjustments, which we're going to use for the foreground here. So I'm just basically kind of adjusting for the highlights. Now I'm suspicious that the way that the tones are laid out in this, that if I start moving the shadows up, it's going to work with the sky and blow that out in parts of the mountain. So you can see that's happening. So I don't want to just work, I want to leave the sky and the mountain exposed the way that I like it here. Now while I'm here in develop, I might take a look, just make sure I like the lens corrections being applied. This is my 24-70 f4 lens, the kit lens, quote kit lens that comes with the Nikon Z7 or Z6. I think it's just fabulously sharp. Let's have a look at what I'm talking about here. You can see right on the edges, it's just razor sharp lens. What am I shooting this at? I'm probably shooting it at, let's see, what was it? If I go, well, I'll take a look at it when I'm back in the main page looking at metadata, but I'll bet it's about f8, something like that. But this lens is sharp, wide open. So we'll go in here and we'll just have a look at sharpening a little bit. I like the lens corrections that were applied. I'm going to click on the details panel, and I'm just going to hold down the Alt key on PC. That would be the Option key for you Mac users, and I play in both worlds. I'm just going to pull that slider. That gives me a black and white mask, just like it does for those of you that are more accustomed to working in Lightroom. And black and white kind of helps me with sharpening, just to see that what I'm doing is what I actually want to be doing. You can kind of get a view of, you know, what's being sharpened here with the threshold layer. I can see there's really not any noise to speak of in this image. I'm pretty happy with that. That threshold just kind of creates a mask that eliminates sharpening from very fine detail if you do have noise. We don't have any noise in here. I'm pretty sure I shot this at my base ISO. About a ½ second shutter speed. Let's really quickly just bounce back here and have a look at that. ½ second shutter speed, oh, f11. I was making sure I had everything razor sharp from foreground to background. And I'm about 36 millimeters with that 24-70 f4 on the Nikon Z7. All right, so we'll jump back into edit again here, get right where we were. And you can see we're back in details where we started. Tone and color, you know, I like the way it was shot. You know, I could warm it up just slightly. I'm liking it. And I'm not going to mess around with this right now. I'd rather do that in my finish editing process. What I want to do is lighten the foreground. And I'm going to start really easily doing most of the foreground here. It's a little trickier where we've got these sections that are shadowy that go up into the sky. But just to start things off, I'm going to go ahead and close this left panel down. I don't need to see my presets right now. And I've gone into local adjustments. So I've left develop where we have all of our basic settings. I'm going into local adjustments, which will get, there's still raw processing, but it's going to get layered over the top here. And what I want to do is I'm going to instead of lowering my exposure, I would rather brighten it a little bit. So let's move my exposure up a stop. And I'm going to grab the graduated filter instead of the brush, and I'm going to drop in a graduated filter here. I'm going to make it a little bit narrower transition here. I just want it to really capture. It's going to be, this is a feather if you think about it. None of the effect is applied above that dashed line, and all of the effect is applied below that dashed line. So that's kind of the feather, and I can rotate the filter right here. And you can see, if I turn this off and on, we're brightening that foreground significantly. Now, we can also go in here and boost shadows a bit. And we could take contrast up a little bit if we wanted to just get a little more contrast in the foreground area only. And you can see where that filter's lying in there. It's as if we'd used a graduated filter from the days of film in front of our lens. Now, one of the reasons I don't like to use graduated filters in the field anymore, actual glass graduated filters, is because you get these lines. If you take a look here, if I go off of here for a minute, you'll see that there's a dark line right in the middle of the frame that's really obvious. I can always see when people have been using graduated filters in complicated landscapes because it puts those dark lines in a straight line across a photo that has kind of a glacial U shape to it here. So what I want to do is grab my brush now, and I'm going to open this up so I can see the mask that I'm working on a little bit better. I want to paint my opacity to begin with in at about 100%. And I'll use a feather of 100 to be a little bit of a soft feather. And I want to zoom in a little bit. I'm going to go to the nav window here. And let's see, it's a Z7, so it's an extremely high resolution image. Let's zoom in a bit though so that we can see what we're doing and still see the whole image. I'm going to reduce my brush size with the left bracket key, and I'm just going to kind of paint that local adjustment in here into this part of the image. Oh, I might be painting out. Yep, there you go. You can choose painting in or painting out. I must have been painting out the last time. I want to paint in, and now you can see there it's being applied where that feather had been. And I'm not going to go right to the edge. I'll show you why in a second. But I do want to go real close to it. I'm going to kind of thread that rock right there. Then I want to take my opacity down a little bit. And I'm going to paint that in. I don't really want to get too much into these trees that are blended in with the sky. I think it's fine if the shape of those trees is silhouette up above and we just have a hint of their trunks in here. So I'm going to paint that in a little bit. I don't care if I get a little bit of the foreground white. And then I want to actually turn on what's known as the perfect brush in Photo Raw and shrink my brush a little bit. And this is an edge-aware brush. As long as I don't cross into the sky, it's going to be aware of that tonal change between the mountain and the sky, and it's only going to paint itself in, including the difference between the foreground mountain and the snow here. It's really just going to paint that effect in right up to the edge without crossing it. You can see how that works. Just clicking in here. And again, I'm using a 26% opacity. I'm not making it harsh. I'm just blending it into the work that we just did. I don't need to do a whole lot of careful, detailed selections. I can just kind of click in here and get that look that I want. That's a real nice, natural, doesn't look like I was using a graduated filter out in the field anymore. And I'm getting all this tonality from a single image. Let's go back to the fit view. I think that's good enough. And if I wanted to, I could copy this mask to apply to a filter when we're working in effects, or another local adjustment if I wanted to add a second local adjustment. And I love the way you can blend the graduated filter with the brush to get that look that you're after. So now, we're getting much more the kind of look that I wanted in there, and without doing the HDR and having to worry about those moving branches in the wind getting blurred one with another. And I could go in here in effects, and there are a whole lot of filters. You can layer those on top of each other. There's lots of cool different ones in here. Instead of taking that time, I'm going to jump into my own dedicated presets. And I actually sell these presets in my store, and On1 sells these presets in their store. They're my 4-season presets from 2019. They work perfectly with Photo Raw 2020, although I'm working on a brand new set to take advantage of all the capabilities in Photo Raw 2020. But I have these 4-season presets where I have Summer in Death Valley. They're kind of inspired by images from different places. And I actually have a Patagonian winter set. And I'm going to jump in here. This is called the Quick View Browser. If I hit escape, we'll jump back out of it. It's this 4 little dots here when I'm in the preview or the preset window here. And I can click on that, and then the plus and minus button make those presets larger and smaller. And I can go in here and say, gosh, I like the look of dawn light. I think cold dawn looks nice. Fitzroy Sunset's brightening things up a little too much. Jet Blue's a little too... And these are a starting point. I'm going to show you what I mean by that in a second. But they're just really a starting point. I think I like dawn light the best. It's subtle. Boom. But it really gives a bit of punch. And here I am. I'm in effects. One of the neat things that I like, and I'm going to just open this whole thing up so we have a bigger view. I can close down the presets window now too. One of the things I really like is that when I create these filters, when I create these presets in ON1, I can have them just apply to effects. So they aren't going to change the basic raw processing that we did on this file at all. They're not going to change the local adjustments that we've done on this raw file at all. They're just going to add effects filters and tweak them for kind of a finished look. And to me, this is a little bit overdone. I'm going to turn each one off. I like to view it as a starting point. These are filters or presets I've created to kind of get the look that I like in this software. So if I jump in, I turn on this tone enhancer, I have a look at what it's doing. It's really obviously just adding contrast. If I turn it off and turn it on, it's bringing out some contrast and a bit of shadow. Well, a bit of compression, which is kind of an HDR filter setting that's thrown in here to tone enhancer. It darkens the highlights and brightens the shadows a little bit. And I like this effect, but I might tone the whole thing down a little bit by just turning its opacity down a little bit. I think that's pretty good right there. Just a subtle effect. Dynamic contrast is this amazing filter you can add. And you can go in and add any of these here. You see dynamic contrast is right there. It's this really, really cool filter that adds localized micro contrast in small details, medium details, and large details. And it really gives micro contrast, pop, and sharpness to the image. You can see that you've got all the kind of blending options that you have in Photoshop here. It's extremely powerful. You've also got protections where you can fade it out of the highlights or out of the shadows or out of skin tones. All these filters have all this kind of control if you hit this little settings button. It's very deep, deep software. What I want to do, I like the effect. I like what it's doing in the image right here, just adding that pop and contrast. I'm not so sure I like it in the water. So what I'm going to do is just open up this filter's mask, and I want to again, I'll move my opacity up to about 60%. I want to paint out. I want 100% feather, so that's a soft edge brush. You won't see the edges of it. I'm going to turn that perfect edge aware brush setting off. Bracket key to the right is going to make my brush bigger. And I'm just going to work on kind of making sure that that water is silky. We're not adding any kind of edginess to this slowly, half-second shutter speed waterfall. You can see as I let go that effect that I'm just painting in here. It's subtle, but I just don't want to be doing too much dynamic contrast in clouds that should be soft and not have sharp edges, or in waterfalls. So there you go. One of my little pet peeves. Then we're going to jump into the color enhancer, and when I click on that, you can see that that's adding a lot of orange and popping the blue a little bit. I want to go in and tweak it just for this image though. I think that the saturation on the blues could come up even more. I think the darkness, I can make the blue a little less luminant, darken that sky just a little bit. I'd like to look at the oranges, and maybe you can see I've turned the hue a little red in this preset. I'm gonna pull that back about halfway. I'm gonna drop the saturation just a little bit there. I think that was just a little overdone. I'll bet red is boosted too. Yep, I'm gonna pull the saturation down on red just a little. I want a nice natural look. I don't want it to look at all surreal or more than it actually was. It was spectacularly beautiful. And then green, I'm going to take a look at green here. I can adjust each one of these channels here. And I just want to pull green saturation back a little bit. I don't want that moss to be distracting in the foreground. There we go. All right. And then finally, well, not quite finally, there's one other thing I want to do to this image at the end. But let's look at the vignette. When I add a vignette, I always make it a really subtle vignette. And I don't need to work on its mask or anything. I like the big softy setting. You'll usually see I've used the big softy in any preset that I make. But if I pull this feather back, and these are styles. You can go, there's a whole list of styles that you can run through and preview how they would look. But I'm going to adjust this, and the way I do it is generally pull that feather all the way back, and if it's not obvious, I can pull the brightness back a little bit, really see what that vignette shape is all about. and I'm going to change its roundness to a bit rounder. It's still ovalized a little bit. I want to drop its size some. And then I want to grab the centering tool, and I can just click in the middle of it and kind of move it to where it's all about the waterfall and the mountain. Real kind of targeted. I might even make it just a smidge smaller and move it just a smidge up like that. It's all about Fitzroy and that waterfall. And then I will turn its feather back up to 100%, and I will make it a little more subtle. I'm going to just turn the darkness, that brightness setting up a little bit. It's darkening the edges, you know, something in I'm just watching the image, not looking at the slider, something in there. I think that it's subtle, but it makes us pull the eye right to the waterfall and the mountain. And boom, I think it's looking really good. The one thing I'd say is I think this little bit of moss is a touch distracting, and I felt that way when I shot the image. So I'm going to jump into about a 50% view here up in the nav window and pull my slider over. And I'm just going to give a shot at using my retouch tools. It's rendering a larger preview here. I remember thinking this when I shot it and wondering if the perfect brush wouldn't just fix it. So I'm going into the perfect eraser here, and I'm in the retouch tools. I've got a clone tool and a healing, a retouch brush, and this perfect eraser, which is a really, really cool, powerful tool. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of draw over these little grasses that are in the rock and just include just them and no other part of the rock, maybe just to right there, and then let off and see if this might just blend that whole thing in as if they'd never been there. Let's see, give it a second. Boom. And you know, sometimes it's mimicking a few little bits of things that were in the image, so I'm just going to have it paint that and erase that bit. Takes it a second. It's doing a lot of work. You know what, maybe just erase all of it. Sometimes it takes a few clicks. Give it a second. There it is. Boom, looks great to me. All right, like it was never there. So we'll just jump back out to fit view. And again, you know, this is a 46 megapixel file. And let's just have a look, you know, make sure that this stuff isn't too edgy. We'll go back in here with my zoom tool and just have a look. It's going to take a second to load this big a file in with all of the settings that have changed in here. There it is. That's looking nice. Let that load. Good stuff. I was a little worried there was going to be kind of an edge halo in there, but it looks great. So, looking really, really good. All right, so I'm going to just pop back out to fit view. Let's take a look at what we had before and what we have after. That's pretty dramatic from a single file. And it just kind of goes to show that often you don't really need to be using HDR technique half the time, just because the modern sensors, particularly those in the backlit Sony produced sensors, whether they're to Nikon specifications or in the brand new Sony A series cameras, they just have so flippin' much dynamic range that, you know, even if it looks off the charts, I think it's a good idea to bracket just so that you don't accidentally miss out on a spectacular shot, particularly something like this where you've been dreaming of getting back there for 5 years and there's a lot of contrast in the scene. But often you can take that single file and work it, and you'll probably get better results for it. And you can see what I love about Photo Raw here. I mean, the fact is that even after we've done all this finish editing and everything, we could always go back in here and we can still look at our sharpening settings and our basic raw processing. You know, you could say, ooh, you know, I'd like to move those midtones up a little bit, image wide now. And it's going to propagate through all the finish edits and everything. We're still working with the raw file. It's completely unadulterated. This is just raw data. If I actually want to go and create a JPEG or something to share this, I'm actually just going to hit export down here. Or I can go into the sharing icon and send it to social media. It's really, really powerful software, and the fact that you just stay raw from start to finish without ever creating a PSD or a TIFF file or anything to edit in Photoshop and actually change pixels is just super powerful and fun. All right, so having talked about that, I've had a lot of questions in the past about backing up and how I do backups on my system. And I have a really, really kind of anal system that I use because of failures in the past that have robbed me of data. You know, if you lose your images, that's everything. That's all the money that you spent on trips and the time and the energy you put into capturing and editing. The minute you have a hard drive failure, all of that could be gone. So I recommend whatever hard drive you're using or hard drives you're using to store your images, have another local set, the same size or bigger, that you're backing up those hard drives to. In my case, I have two Drobos here. I have a newer Drobo that's got Thunderbolt 3 and an older Drobo that's Thunderbolt 2 and USB 3. And the older Drobo backs up the newer Drobo. And I can just add drives to those. Their Drobos are an assortment of hard drives that act as one hard drive, one big hard drive, and have kind of ability to move fast into your computer. So fortunately for me, I had that set up just in case there were an earthquake or a fire or a flood or some horrible damage where I lost everything here in the studio. I also use a service called Backblaze where you can back up an unlimited amount of data to the cloud. If you're going to do that, try to make sure that you have good fast internet and check your upload limits with your internet service provider. I had to switch from Comcast over to CenturyLink because of that, because Comcast charged a whole bunch of money for large upload, and trying to back up to Backblaze with terabytes of data would have cost me a fortune. So I like having everything in someone else's cloud storage, and there are getting to be more and more reasonable options for that. I like Backblaze. But what I did, I was actually formatting a smaller hard drive, and I was multitasking and wrapping presents, and we had the whole holiday season happening and people visiting and kids sick and lack of sleep, and I clicked the wrong hard drive and I formatted my big Drobo. I formatted 18 terabytes of data, all my videos, these kinds of videos that I do, instructionals, videos from the field of epic things that I see with wildlife or landscapes and light, time lapse, photos, you name it, 17 terabytes. I formatted it. And when I tried to do a recovery, a lot of it was corrupted. So fortunately, I had the second Drobo with all the data. And right now you can see I'm moving my file with all my images that are in my library back across from one Drobo to the other. It's a little slow flowing through the computer and out from one through the processor and back to the other. It's going to take about 17 hours to move 10 terabytes essentially of photo data. But all that stuff's localized here. If it had been a complete crash, I could always go into Backblaze and request them to mail me hard drives with all that data. I'd have to pay a hefty deposit, which would be returnable once I send the drives back, but at least it's an insurance policy for total loss. And my own stupid fault here, hitting the wrong button, not paying close enough attention, moving, multitasking in a way that I'm not great at, particularly when sleep deprived, but it just goes to show it can happen to anybody, so make sure you're backing up your data, preferably both locally and in the cloud somewhere. All right, everybody. I hope this year is got tons of photo adventures for everybody, lots of learning. Get out there, get taking pictures, and thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.